Listening to Archaeopolitics, a MuggleDit.com podcast about politics in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. I'm your host, Adri, a recovering English major, and with me today I have the lovely Aureo Potts from the Speak Beastie podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, I am so excited to have you on. You don't even know.
And we're international.
Hence of cultural expectations. And the chapter is, again, the Advanced Guard. This is the third chapter of Order of the Phoenix. And let's do a quick summary of this chapter. Oh, God. So Harry asked Hedwig to pester Hermione and Ron until they've written back. Yeah. And that's kind of problematic. And then the Dursleys just leave and are like, Harry, don't touch the TV. We're leaving.
We're locking you in a room. Fine.
That is perfect. And then he has some visitors.
Yeah, which like Harry, his first reaction is like, oh, burglars. Then he's like, oh no, burglars wouldn't be that loud.
And that's our gorgeous Tonks.
Just knocking everything over.
Yeah, and they come to transport him. They come to break him out, really.
Yeah, which is like 9 people come to break out a 15-year-old wizard, 14-year-old wizard, because his birthday hasn't happened.
15, I think. No, not yet 15. Well, he is precious cargo indeed.
I mean, yes, but I mean, then again, Moody would fly over the South Pole if it would help his security plan.
And then Tonks helps Harry pack, and then he finds out that she can change her appearance at will, and he's like, ooh, that's a cool trick.
Yeah, which also that is literally I want to be able to do that. Can you imagine?
I mean, forget plastic surgery,
Exactly. But also, is it just changing your face, or is it also changing your height and stature and stuff?
Oh, that's it. You know what? I like that. Is it changing your body type as well?
If you could just change your gender.
Interesting. I don't think we know enough about that,
I think just from what we see, it's pretty much only looks where you can change.
Yeah, but
because otherwise it
wouldn't that
could replace a polyjuice completely.
Yeah. Well, she did get top marks in stealth.
Yeah.
Not in stealth. And what was that? Stealth is what she doesn't have.
Yeah. Clearly not. I'm forgetting the words.
Maybe it was concealment.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then they leave. Lupin leaves the Dursleys a note, and Harry's like, don't bother. They're he's so sassy Harry, my favorite Harry. And then
so the Dursleys won't be worried. Oh, they'll just be bummed out that I'm happy and safe. Okay. And then it says, Lupin just smiles. Oh, man.
And then they fly away, and Moody's like, let's turn back just in case. And and everyone's like, are you kidding me?
We're all frozen to our brooms.
Moody is a big mood. And the chapter ends with Harry just reading the Grimmauld Place secret.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't understand what it's about yet.
I mean, that's the next chapter, so.
I mean, that was a good cliffhanger, obviously.
I mean, this is kind of the chapter that moves the Moody Harry is trapped at the Dursleys to Moody Harry is trapped now in Grimmauld Place.
Well, fun stuff. So we thought about the politics of cultural expectations because we see kind of the Muggle and the wizarding world kind of clash.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean,
big time.
Every time that is kind of mentioned, but it's definitely most profoundly here in this chapter. I'm just like, wizards, you think you're so high and mighty, but really, are you? Are you really? They were like, oh, those muggles with their weird tech stuff. And then they couldn't like do anything if it weren't for like Harry or Hermione helping them out all the time.
Yes, so like that clash between Muggle and wizard culture is like a big deal, but also the clash between like even their own individual cultures, right? Because some of them are Muggle born, some of them are wizard born, and Tonks definitely does not conform to any cultural expectations because she says like, I'm not good with like the cleaning spells. My mom is.
Yeah, and then on top of that, her dad is a Muggle and her mom's a witch. And her mom's a witch on top of that from one of the big wizarding families.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, and Tonks is like, whatever, I'll just be an Auror.
And then, like, also you have that, you think where Harry's like, what, you're an Auror? That's so cool, because, like, it's the dream job for, like, teenage boys to do. It's like, you know.
What, you're a cop? It's so great.
I mean, it's not like special forces even.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, fine. You're a dark wizard catcher? Oh my god.
I mean, yeah, it is that like teenage boy dream thing. Like, oh, imagine I could do that. Yeah. And so everyone they
imagine
meet,
I could use the skills honed by Expelliarmusing everything in sight to becoming a wizard special force cop.
I mean, true.
And then, you know, you have Kingsley Shacklebolt, which like does not also conform to Harry's idea of being of what an Auror looks like.
Yeah, because he's like really calm, collected, but like he's probably the one that has the easiest to fit in both in the Muggle and the Wizarding world. Because, you know, we know at the later point he actually works in the Muggle world to protect the Muggle Prime Minister in Half-Blood Prince, I think that is. So he obviously is very good at like fitting in both worlds and obviously being very good at his job because he's supposedly moving up ranks fairly quickly, I would assume.
Yeah, and like Mad-Eye Moody is definitely kind of like an anomaly in the wizarding culture, but also very respected. So that's why he's able to be an anomaly and so weird.
I mean, he's kind of the veteran character, isn't he? He like he's missing a leg and eye, and it's just like rude kind of thing. Especially if you consider that this is in Britain where people are always polite.
So I always say that my goal in life is to become wealthy enough. I mean, I have no wealth, but I'm just saying like rich so that I can stop being weird and start becoming eccentric. You know, like the things that I like and the things that I do wouldn't change. It's just that your status
and then
shifts the way people see you.
And then because you're in a certain status, people be like, oh, that's so cool. Why aren't we all like that?
Yeah, like instead of being a freak, I could be just that eccentric lady with all the money. That like gives to charity and stuff, you know?
That'd be cool. That was a good life dream.
I know. that's my goal. Lupin doesn't fit in the wizarding world because he's a werewolf.
But he also doesn't really fit in the Muggle world either because he's a wizard.
Right? So he's like that in-between state that we were talking about earlier.
And I like, especially because, you know, people not knowing he's a werewolf, they'll be like, oh, Lupin is this cool guy. He's all right. And then like people knowing that he is a werewolf, they'll be like, what? No, I'm never spending time with that person ever again. I'm just like, but you thought that guy was all right like 2 seconds ago. And we see the same with Hagrid. Even like Ron being like, oh, what? He's half giant? I was like, well, duh, on the one hand. But also like, does that change your experience you had with Hagrid this far, just now knowing what his genes are?
Yeah, like, I mean, you know him and you've known him for a long time. It's not like you just met him, Ron.
Yeah,
come on.
And he's not done anything like sketchy, I suppose.
Again, this comes back to stereotypes. And we kind of talked about, you know what? It's not that we weren't talking about things earlier. It's just that we were just prepping to get in depth.
That's how we phrase it.
Let's do the Gryffindor thing of like retroactively fitting everything we just said into this.
Yep. And I think with like Lupin, he's also like, he doesn't like, because he's always described as like shabby looking. So like, I think that's probably much more of a stereotype we have in the Muggle world, especially because wizards don't seem to care as much about looks. Because like looking at Moody, he doesn't look like a normal person either. But like,
but Lupin doesn't have the status that Moody
but
does.
also like if you were a Muggle and you've like met and Moody and Lupin, you'd be like weird homeless people because from like what they're described, because they're like shabby looking and like beaten up, and you'd be like, okay, like the person would come and you'd be like crossing the street, be like, no, best to have some distance.
You know, that reminds me. This reminds me a lot of Neverwhere from Neil Gaiman, where like all the magical people are like basically looking like homeless people in the real world, in the non-magical world.
I don't know that one, but it sounds really interesting.
And if you've never read it, this is the time.
I was just thinking something to add to my to-read list.
Yes, he's very good. Now, we talked about earlier about technology versus magic, right? So like in when this book is set in like the mid 90s, I think it's 96 or 95.
It's 94, but turning 95 within this book.
Okay, see, there you go. You know more than I do. It's like this place in technology where we are starting to see personal computers at home, and the internet is not quite a fully accessible thing to homes yet. Like it's mostly used in workspaces to share information within workspaces, but we have like gaming consoles and all these things that make life a little bit easier for non-magical people. And then magic's kind of like still at a standstill, right? There doesn't seem to be much innovation in magic. And it seems to me like at some point technology is going to at least catch up with it.
I mean, already like we obviously have a scene where they're standing in the kitchen and looking at all the things the Dursley have in the kitchen, and just like looking at a very basic thing that every one of us has in the kitchen, which is a fridge. Like that is super handy. Like, do Muggles just do wizards just constantly have to like do cooling charms or whatever other charms? Like, how does that work?
I mean, just like a preservation charm, you know?
Like that. I mean, does that like constantly has to be like reapplied, and if you forget, your like food gets bad, or?
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions we need answers for.
Because let's be honest, some of our technology, especially nowadays with what we have, is just super handy. Like, I'm not even sure magic is better than technology by now, like 2019 standards.
Yeah, and what happens is, I think when we have two cultures that, especially one thinks it's higher than the other, it doesn't want to learn from the other culture. So like wizard culture, and even though they don't like to see it that way, in the more liberal sense, right? They still think they're better than Muggles.
And I mean, we see it with like
they still think they're
subjects like Muggle studies, where it's like a bit of a joke.
Exactly. It's a little bit anthropological in a sense, right? So like I usually think about like, imagine Hermione taking Muggle studies and being like, no, that's actually not what that is.
I mean, we didn't see what she said during Muggle studies because she did take it for a year.
Oh, that's right. See, you're fact checking me, and I love it. I'm pretty sure she can teach the class.
I mean, I'm assuming that is canon. Because seriously, why did she take that subject?
But I also think about it in the terms of like whenever someone tells me about my culture or is talking about my culture, and I'm like, actually, that's not necessarily true. You're not factoring in these other things. Like there was this big thing about people saying that Puerto Ricans didn't pay taxes. And I was like, actually, that's not necessarily true. Like we they were saying that we don't pay federal taxes, and I was like, well, you're forgetting to factor in that the Puerto Ricans living in Puerto Rico pay taxes to the Puerto Rican government, and then the government allocates a certain amount to pay for what would be the federal taxes. So they just we pay to like a centralized place, but then the Puerto Rican government disburses the federal portion to the IRS.
Which,
so so we are paying the taxes.
I mean, it's probably much more common here because in Europe we have so many different cultures and countries, and people like I have my company is based in the UK and I have like hundreds of colleagues in the UK, but like just for my team, like we're like 8 or 9 people in the UK, and there's like 2 people in Germany, one of them obviously being me, and 1 person in France. And every time I'm over in the UK, I have to like tell them stuff because they just don't know. They just don't care. They're just on their island, and they'll be like, oh, whatever happens in Europe, we don't care. And it comes down to like basic geography.
Brexit.
Yeah, it's like that's like the mentality they've grown up with all the time. It's like, we're on our island, we don't really care about Europe, even if it's like right next to us. And it comes down to stuff like not knowing that like France has an island in the Mediterranean Sea, and which one of those islands it is, and that it is part of France, and which of those islands belong to Italy. And I'm so like, like France is like your neighboring country. It's not like it's on the other end of the world. You could know those things. This is not like hard knowledge. Like, look at the map just once in your life.
Also, like, Wikipedia is a thing, right? Like,
but I just really see that a lot with my colleagues, that they're just like, they're so restricted to how things are in the UK, and it clashes massively with like HR and admin stuff when they're like, well, we pay you a bonus, but like there's taxes on the bonus, and then like in Germany your taxes are 45%, so like almost half the money goes to the state, whereas in the UK taxes are 20%. So you get a lot more money from your bonus actually comes to you, whereas in Germany, like half the money doesn't even make it to me. And they just don't know that.
Oh, that's a big tax. Yeah.
They just don't know that. I was like, but you have like an office in Germany. Like, you should at least pretend to care more about Germany and the German laws. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, so these are the things. So, in my little example, it's just like people like to tell me how my country works, right? But they don't want to listen to like, well, technically you're right in the way that like, in my example, right? Like Puerto Ricans don't pay the IRS directly for federal taxes, but you're also wrong in thinking that no federal money comes from that no federal taxes are paid by Puerto Ricans, because the government actually just is the centralized place where it comes
and you can
from.
like, I can see how that went down. Someone like told them, be like, yeah, Puerto Ricans don't pay taxes. They'll be like, what? And then just that is their belief until they're challenged differently.
Yeah, and there's no like scholarly sources for it because it's a fact. So I had to like show them a Wikipedia page, and they were like, well, Wikipedia is not like a source. And I'm like, as an English major, I fucking know this, but I am telling you as someone who lived in the island that I paid the equal amount of taxes as I do in the States.
And I mean, even like from a logical point of view, how would that ever happen? Like, how would, they forget about you? That's just not a thing.
Well, also on top of that, we get there's this port rule where you can't buy things made in Puerto Rico. So like we have like big pharmaceuticals in the island, and if you want to buy, like, let's say Tylenol has a pharmaceutical company in the island, so if you want to buy ibuprofen, you can't buy it directly from the factory. That the factory takes it to the port into like a ship, and then once it's in the ship, some taxes are put on top of that, and then they disembark it from the ship, and now you can buy it at a markup.
Oh, that sounds overly complicated.
Oh yeah, no, it's called. Let me double check. It's called the Jones Law.
I mean, as I said earlier, I lived in New Zealand for a bit, and New Zealand has a really strong dairy farming industry. But like 80% of their like dairy product they sell out, like they export to other countries. But then it's not enough left. The 20% that they leave in New Zealand, and like don't like nail me down to those numbers. They're just like roundabout numbers I'm giving you. It's not enough to like feed New Zealand. So then they have to like import milk back into the country. I'm just like, that sounds kind of stupid, but it's probably the cheapest way to do it. But like from like an environmental point of view, it's really not that sensible.
Okay, so the Jones Act is actually what granted us citizenship. Let me double check what is called like a shipment. Oh, yeah, it is. It is the Jones Act too. Okay, so it's a ton of things are covered under the Jones Act. So it's a 1920 regulation that requires that goods shipped from American port to another be transported on a ship that is American built, American owned, and crewed by U.S. citizens or permanent residents. For the residents of Puerto Rico, the Jones Act is huge. Oh, this is from Vox. Like they were explaining the Jones Act after the hurricane happened because the Jones Act didn't let us get stuff after the hurricane. And by us, I mean people still in the island. I did live through the hurricane in 2017. Okay. Basic shipments and goods from the island to the U.S. mainland and vice versa must be conducted via expensive protected ships rather than exposing them to global competition. That makes everything Puerto Ricans buy unnecessarily expensive relative to goods purchased on either the U.S. mainland or other Caribbean islands and drives up the cost of living on the island overall. Huh. So cars have like a bigger tax rate or like a bigger markup than here in the mainland. Like I was talking to my parents about, because they still live in the island, and about, you know, how much I paid for my car. And they were like, that car starts here at like $4,000 more than it starts there. Or, you know, some markup like that. And through the Jones Act, the United States makes billions a year because those taxes are paid to the American government. So not only do we actually pay federal taxes, but Puerto Ricans also pay a different kind of tax.
I mean, we have a similar kind of situation here with like when East and Western Germany were reunited, which the anniversary was yesterday, like day of recording and not day of release.
So yesterday, November 9th.
Yeah. So on November 9th, the Berlin Wall came down. That's when East and Western Germany, and that's 30 years ago yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I think then officially reunited, it was like in 1990. So next year is the official 30-year Germany is one country.
I feel so old. Punch to the gut.
I mean, I was born in 92, so I've been born into a reunited Germany. So
no, I'm just like, I'm thinking about the 90s, and like when you say 30 years ago, to me it's still like 1970, you know? Like, oh wait, it's now the 90s, that is 30 years ago.
I mean, I feel like the same when I have a couple of like friends in my basketball team. They're like 17, 18, and they're like obviously born like 2000, 2001, and I was just like, wait, how can someone who's like born in 2001 be like an adult now? That just doesn't make sense. Like they're legal adults. That is so weird.
I know, I get it. Okay, but back to Harry Potter. So, you know, like this idea of like muggles versus wizards, and like the wizarding culture believing themselves to be superior to the muggle culture, especially is funny because Vernon definitely thinks he's superior to wizard culture. So it goes in both ways.
Yeah. And what I also noted, because I listened to the chapter before this one, so chapter 2 as well, And during that, there's the whole interrogation kind of scene going on with like where Warren and Petunia try to figure out what happened to Dudley because of the whole Dementor incident. And like Vernon calls Harry boy a lot, and
Yes.
it's
Well,
really
that's his
rude.
favorite thing.
Yeah, but then Mad-Eye Moody in this chapter calls him at least twice boy as well. And it still comes off kind of rude to me, but it's obviously like we forgive him because he's a good guy kind of thing.
Well, and I know that this is in an American context, right? But I think we would be remiss to not mention that boy is a loaded term in American context, is, when it is directed at a Black man.
Oh, why is that?
So I am going to Google this so I don't get it wrong, but my understanding is that that was the term that was used by slave owners to Black men. Like I think there was like a Biden call like a Black man boy, and that set off.
Did Biden ever not do anything wrong?
Yeah, so like infantilizing someone by calling them boy, and Harry's like 15. He's not necessarily a man yet, but I feel like maybe he does feel that way when Vernon calls him boy.
And I mean, I suppose I see why Moody does it because he's like this veteran kind of dude who's like, there's this kid that we're supposedly now protecting because Dumbledore said that he's like important to the fight and everything, but he's still a kid. So, and also he just had his wand in his back pocket. No one knows about basic wand safety anymore.
I mean, obviously they don't. All right, I think we're ready to go to the quotes. What quote did you feel like exemplified the politic of cultural expectations?
I chose this one. This is Alistair Moody, Harry. Lupin continued, pointing towards Moody. Yeah, I know, said Harry, uncomfortable. It felt odd to be introduced to somebody he thought he'd known for a year.
Oh boy, that is complicated.
Yeah, which, I mean, kind of points to Crouch Jr. for being very on point with what Moody is in real life. But obviously, the most we ever see of Moody is in book 4, and that's not the real Moody.
We see a facsimile of Moody, like someone acting like Moody, which is funny because Moody is just like this idea of like a grumpy old grandpa that's missing a leg and an eye.
And also, like, considering obviously Crouch Jr. had a lot of like one-to-one talks with Harry because he had this interest of having Harry succeed into the maze because that was his goal. And obviously the real Alistair Moody doesn't give so much, like he doesn't think Harry's that special that he's devoting one-to-one tips and time to him. He's like, yeah, whatever, there's this kid that I'm now moving from place A to place B, and we're flying through the North Pole.
But you know what is interesting that, and I've noticed this as we're talking, is that maybe the people we should always be skeptical of are the adults that are taking too much interest in a young kid, because every adult who is quote unquote good doesn't really care that much about Harry or spending one-on-one time with a 15-year-old.
I mean, yeah, but then there's Hagrid and Lupin.
I mean, but those are like exceptions. But like think about like a Gilderoy Lockhart and a like like all these adults who express like too much interest in Harry and getting to know Harry in like these different ways, not like in a Hagrid way where he's just a kid at heart still, in many ways, and he just wants to show off his like magical beast collection. But and Lupin is more like a mentor rather than a like fanboy.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And then obviously coming up in this book, there's Umbridge, who has a lot of one-to-one time with Harry for many different reasons.
Honestly, as a 33-year-old, I don't think I could, stomach being around a 15-year-old too long. I'm sorry.
Honestly, I left school and never came back.
I was a teacher when I was 23 for a year. I was a middle school teacher, so I taught 8th grade, 9th grade, 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then some 6th grade. And I lasted a whole year because I was just like, peace out, I'm leaving. This is just like the Defense of the Dark Arts teacher. Bye. I cannot be around teenagers this long. It gives me PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. And also, like, obviously, like, as a child in school, you think, this is everything. This is your whole world. This is what dictates your thing. And then now that, like, I'm 27 and I have people in my team who are like 17, 18 in my basketball team. And they, like, you know, we have basketball practice in the evening. We'll meet up before the gym and I'll be like, so how was your day? They're like, I wrote like 2 tests. It was really hard. I was like, okay. I really can't relate back to that anymore because, like, you just went to school. It's like not that hard. I like have a job and I did uni on the side of that job and then I do stuff for Mugglenet and, you know, I have to clean my own stuff. I have to cook for myself. Like, you just have to go to school. I just can't relate
I
anymore.
mean, it's hard, right? It's hard to relate. Like when I was...
Yeah. I mean, in a way, yes. But then, like, you go out of school and be like, oh, the real world is not at all what I expected it to be, because you kind of assume grown-ups behave better than they do, but they really don't. Yeah. I mean, even something I can remember and kind of relate to, like, when you're like 10, 11, you think someone who's like 16, 17 is like grown up and knows how the world runs. Then you're 16, 17, you think, oh no, someone in like the 20s knows how the world works, like 21, 23. You'll be like, yeah, they know what's going on. Then like you're 21, 23, and I was like, no, I still have no clue how this life thing works. And now I'm 27, I still have no clue how this life thing works, and I'm assuming it just continues like that now, because I'm just assuming you just never know how this life thing works. You just
just when you think like adults have it together and then you're an adult and you're like, oh, we're all faking it. Cool.
Yeah. None of us has a clue, but it's all right.
It just makes me feel like, oh shit. There are no answers.
But what is a cute?
So when I thought about this chapter, when I first listened to it, because of course I've been listening to it on my way to work to get ready, the one thing that stood out to me specifically was Tonk's reaction to being in a Muggle home, and she says, "Funny place," she said. "It's a bit too clean, you know what I mean? A bit unnatural," and it's just. Just the cultural expectation of like, then she goes on to say that Muggles are very clean and like a bit too clean, and that kind of reminds me of like being raised by a Puerto Rican mother who is like cleaning obsessed, and like her standards of cleaning are not my standards of cleaning, and she would be like, you're always a mess, and I'm like, well, it's clean, it's just not like hospital clean, you know. And there's like a lot of bleach in my home and like a lot of Fabuloso, which is like this cleaning mixture. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I have to alarm. Yes. So Fabuloso is like this cleaning mixture that's like super aromatic and like, you know, like it's super common in Latin households. And like my mom's like favorite hobby, and I'm not kidding, other than like figuring out crafts and stuff, she always has to be on the go. She's not like a person who knows how to relax. I think that's the ADHD that she has, that she won't get treated for. And she's always cleaning. And I'm just like, Mom, oh my God. Okay. Like, so Tonks would really think my house was unnatural too. Like the house I grew up in.
And I mean, like in the chapter, it continues like they enter Harry's room, which is obviously
it's just like that's more like state.
It. And she's like, yeah. But she then also is like, her dad is I think she calls it sloth. And then she's like, I guess it varies between Muggles and wizards, doesn't it?
But she makes this like knee-jerk assumption and then carries it through. And then she's like, oh, wait, maybe I'm being prejudiced.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like as a whole, the wizarding world, as described by through Harry's eyes, and Joe describes it, it's a little bit messy and untidy, and like there's always like a film of dust on it. This is almost like
Yeah.
antique type.
They are kind of living
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
antique, aren't they? I mean, like they are like freaked out about how to get into the subway station and how like escalators work and how lifts work, and
They're living in their
it's
own
just like,
bubble, and like I
okay.
said, I don't think, I mean, other than like some innovations that we see with like brooms and like books, maybe I don't think we see a lot of gadget innovations throughout this series.
Yeah, I think that's probably why it's so off-putting for us, because if we look back at technical like development, like it's going exceptionally fast, and we like 30 years back computers were like still brand new. Now like people start to not having like a computer because they can do everything from their phone, that sort of thing. Whereas like the muggle world, the wizarding world kind of stopped evolving around the time that books
Well,
were
I
the thing.
think that's
And then it was like, okay,
I think
cool,
that's
books,
also
fine.
like Joanne Kathleen Rowling's or JK as we call her. That's her actual politic coming into work here, where she thinks that technology has pulled us in this direction that she maybe doesn't agree with, because she's very critical
I
of
mean,
Dudley and technology, and like she's also very critical of like bigger bodies, and I don't agree with her at all in any of those fronts, because technology, like anything, is a tool, right? Like just as a wand can be used to kill,
yeah.
it could be used to make very amazing and good things. So just as that, technology is the same thing.
Yeah, and considering that she's writing on a
I mean,
computer.
she wrote in notebooks first, if for
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I mean, but she obviously switched to computers and is now using computers and has been obsessed with Twitter for a while, but's now abstinent for some
Maybe
reason.
because her hot takes were maybe not the best.
I mean, that's like my main issue. Like, you can't like be like responsible and take the like crown for being like, hey, I've educated a whole generation in kind of what is right and how you should behave and how you shouldn't like judge too easily and how you should get a whole like
Mhm.
facts and everything, but then be shocked that that same claim falls back on you when the people be like, yeah, okay, now we've taken these learnings, these lessons that you've provided us, and you don't fall into
Well,
this, so we're
she
now
doesn't do
challenging you
criticism
back.
very well, and that's one of my criticism towards her,
Yeah.
really, is that I have seen people getting blocked for just not question, and not even in a disrespectful way, just questioning her logic on a tweet that she sent out, or be like, well, but have you considered this point of view? And it's very like nicely done. I don't think it's done out of spite, and then she just blocks them, and I'm just like, this is not what you
Yeah.
taught us to do, man.
Yeah, exactly. And that is my main thing with her too. I was like, I like appreciate for what you did, but now that you've raised us as this like critical thinking generation, you have to live with us as the critical thinking
Yeah, it reminds
generation,
me
you
of my
know?
parents, and I was a teenager, and they raised me to be very critically thinking, like outside of Harry Potter, right? So, like, my dad raised me to be this like questioning being, and so did my mom, because they're very like educated people who wanted me to be educated on issues and question everything around me, and like I would like use those skills against their authoritarian way of parenting, and they would get
Yeah, of
so
course.
mad.
That's what happens. And if you can't accept it, then you should never like teach those lessons in the first place. But yeah, that's my main thing with her. I'm just like,
Like the students have become the master, Joe.
yeah. You have to accept that. But also like I think we just don't know how much is still in her control. Like how much of her tweets are still her.
Oh, that's
Like,
another thing, right? Like we don't know. And how much of
yeah.
the Twitter management is her, and how much of it is someone else
Yeah.
is just blocking things so that she doesn't have to see them without her knowing all these things. But also,
Yeah.
she still employs all
Yeah.
these
And also,
people. So at a point, it's also back on you.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking at the whole where she just kind of
Oh, Johnny
defended
Depp. Don't get me
Depp.
started.
Yeah, which just really didn't feel like it was something that she wrote.
I
So,
feel like it was something that
and I'm not,
someone told her to write because of the contract she has.
yeah, that's just like what it feels like. It didn't feel like something that she really felt like she was
She
behind it.
definitely has golden
So,
handcuffs. They're very nice looking,
that is a
but
good description.
uh, so
Uh,
for you, who is the character that exemplifies the cultural expectations, like the politics in this chapter?
I I put down
Hmm.
Lupin because, as we discussed before, he kind of has to shift between
Hmm.
both worlds because we know that he had like Muggle jobs because he was obviously not wanted in the wizarding world because he's a werewolf. But then he would also lose those Muggle jobs because obviously every month he was sick for a couple of days. So he's an outsider in both worlds, but he still is adaptable. Like he can still fit in into both worlds. Like he obviously fit in well enough to keep jobs at least for a couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
understand that. Mine is, surprise, surprise, Tonks, because she comes from a family that is between both worlds. She has like a muggle born father and like a witch from a very distinguished family. Maybe not what you want to be distinguished for, but um, but even then, she doesn't quite understand muggle culture. And maybe that's because her dad didn't do a really good job of explaining that to her.
I find that very interesting. I mean, I'm just very German, so there's not really a lot to unpack for me. But it's still kind of interesting to like get the backgrounds where you're
Hmm.
coming from.
Culturally, like, why do you do the
But
things you do, you know?
yeah, 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 exactly. Like, why is something, and also like, why do some stuff like are there trigger points for you, and why is other stuff just not a trigger point for
Yeah,
you?
and like speaking of which,
Yeah.
like I always feel like so I did like the, genetics test that's gonna, track us forever and ever when the data gets sold somewhere, I guess. It showed that I am my genetic makeup is literally from everywhere around the world except Russia and Australia. So I'm like just
Okay.
scattered around the world. And I'm just like, oh, cool. Like my people really, really went around before settling in Puerto Rico. So like I have like this mixing pot of cultures and influences. But my cultural heritage starts in the island about 300 years ago or 200 years ago. So that's what I know. But it's interesting to know who you are, where you come from, so that you can kind of look into like, oh, where did these people come from and why did they end up here? I don't know. It's really like people's histories are interesting, right? Like, and our people's histories should be interesting to us.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I'm like, I listen to a German podcast that's called Half Potato because we Germans are sometimes referred as
Oh my god,
potatoes,
I love this.
and it's and it's essentially a guy whose both parents are Korean, but he grew up in Germany, and he talks with other people who are like half German or like moved to Germany at some point in their life, and how they experience living in Germany, and like how that clashes sometimes with their upbringing, or like how they've been treated differently because they obviously they look differently to Germans, and it's really really interesting, but it's also sometimes really really shocking because I remember one episode there was uh I'm not sure where she came from, but she said that someone tried to burn her when she was eight
Oh
years
god.
old because she just looked like, I think, like she had a dark skin color, and they just grabbed her and like put like gas over her, and then the lighter didn't go on, and that's when she was able to run away.
That is so.
And I was just like,
Oh god.
fuck. Yeah, it gets really dark sometimes, but overall, it's a really interesting podcast because just for me, as someone who is German and always has to kind of fit in here. No one's ever questioned me being
Mm-hmm.
here. It's kind of interesting how other people experience living in Germany.
I think that if we stop being curious about other people's lived experiences, we stop growing. Yeah.
But then also, like, if you go travel and see the world and you're the outsider somewhere for once and you see different cultures, then you always kind of are more open to like accept other cultures where you're
Mm-hmm.
from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's like the gift of storytelling and the gift of reading is that I mean, if you don't have access to I guess travel the world, you can learn about other people's lives, even though they're fictional, and you can start to relate
Yeah.
to other people in a different way. I also know therapy for me has been incredibly good at me being less self-centered and listening to other people's stories. Because I have 1 hour every other week where I just get to talk about myself.
Yeah, and it's all about you
Yeah.
and no one's challenging. Yeah.
Well,
No, I get
yeah,
that.
and you know, I also learned a lot from my therapist because she knows how to like ask questions that will get me to say like a more like a deeper answer. And I've started using some of those tools that she uses in my work because I need to get deeper answers to be able to write grants about programs I'm not the subject matter expert in. And so I'll say like,
Yeah.
"Oh, tell me more about that." You know, like, "Ooh, how do they feel?" You know, like that kind of thing. And then I get more richer details than just the standard stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know what?
Yeah.
Therapy is good for your work too.
And can I just say, like, the two characters we've both picked, they end up being
Oh
married.
my God, they're the best. And they also end up being dead, but okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to point that out. But no, it's just interesting that those two also end up being a couple.
I
So
mean, I love them as a couple because she is exuberant and he is withdrawn. And I feel
yeah,
like that is definitely the vibe in my marriage.
yeah. No, I see that. Like my parents are the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
And I
yeah,
think like if you can also have two very similar personalities and one of them forces themselves to be the other one, usually the quieter
yeah,
one, and then that comes with a lot of scorn and regret and you know what I mean. Listeners, you know what I mean. It's just you just get very angry and then you have blowout fights and you don't want that. So never hide who you are.
I mean, that is generally a good advice.
Never hide for
Because
you who you are for anyone. And
yeah,
I have been that person and it made me very unhappy.
no, me too.
Yeah,
So
learn from
so
our
just
mistakes.
I think it also just kind of comes as you grow older that you be like, oh, I don't need to fit
Oh
in.
yeah.
They can just accept me for who I am, or they're just not worth my time. But I think it's very hard to do that as you're like when you're still in school and a teenager, because you're just like, you kind of are surrounded with the same people and you just kind of have to try to fit in a way. But like as an adult, it's just much easier to be like, yeah, whatever, I can walk away.
It also helps when you find your people. Like when you
Yeah.
find online friends or IRL friends who don't question your choices and accept you as who you are. And if you have friends around you who are trying to control you or say you're weird in a mean way, not in a fun way, then drop those friends.
Which is sometimes easier said than done. And also sometimes you don't necessarily realize that.
I think Cleo says she
Um,
agrees with all
I
of
feel like
this.
it. I feel like your dog doesn't agree with
No, no,
me.
she's like, I think what she's saying is, if I may, that she thinks that we should all break up with our friends who are mean to us.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree. We should all have wise dog friends like that.
Yeah, and she's just like growling at the mean friends. That's all she's doing. Not at you, at mean
Yeah.
friends.
See, you all now have a wise dog at your side.
Ah, and she's
Internally.
only 6 months old, you know?
Yeah, she won't stop. She hasn't learned boundaries yet.
Yeah, she is definitely an exuberant dog. She is quite a lot sometimes, and I'm like, oh my god, is this who I am as a person?
Yeah, that's more likely.
I mean, obviously this podcast is extremely successful. What are you talking about?
I mean, yeah. I constantly run into people that be like, hey, have you heard about this podcast? And aren't you the one person from this podcast? That happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Not.
No, but real talk, there was this one time where my original co-host, Erin, was having lunch at like this local place in New Mexico where she's from. And she heard two college students talking about our podcast, and she didn't know these people. And I was like, have we made it? We have made it.
I mean, Lizzie from Speak Beastie, she lives in the UK. She messaged me one day. It's like this cafe place that she goes every day. The owner's girlfriend listens to Speak Beastie, so I'm famous here. And I'm just like, damn, that's never happened to me. And she's like, come visit me. We go to the coffee place, and then you're famous too. I was like, okay, that feels like forcing it, but yeah, okay.
Well, you know what? And once I'm on Speak Beastie, then I can go to the UK and go to the cafe and be famous.
Let's meet all there. Beastie meetup.
Yes, I love it. All right. So we usually end this podcast with media that we've been consuming that is, not Harry related. But I mean, it could be, I guess, but usually not. So what have you been watching or, listening to that is fun?
So I've just literally just finished my master thesis and climbed out of this hole I've been in for 2 months. So I've actually consumed any media.
That is actually like a mood.
Yeah, I'm so happy it's over. But I've been watching this Netflix series that's called Inside Bill's Brain, and it's about Bill Gates. And I think it's this 3-parter, and it kind of shows how he grew up and how he founded Microsoft, but it's also much more about what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does nowadays.
Okay, great.
So it's about polio and the hygiene problem in Africa, but it's also about global warming and environmental crisis and what we can do and what he's working on. So I thought it was really interesting.
Oh, great!
Because Bill Gates, and you kind of know what he did.
Oh, you mean
how it all came.
You mean my real father who hasn't come and gotten me and given me billions of dollars?
Yeah, that guy.
I remember there was this one time my dad was driving me to school, and we were just joking around because that's what me and my dad do. My mom not so much. We just have the same kind of sense of humor. And my dad was saying something, and I was asking like, oh, when can I get a new computer or whatever? I was like maybe 15, 14. And he was like, yeah, we don't have money for that right now. Like, that's not in the budget. And I was like, well, when Daddy Bill Gates shows up, you're going to be real sorry. And so after that, it became like this thing about me being like Bill's real daughter. And like, when Bill Gates shows up, you're going to be real sorry you didn't like treat me better, because I'm going to be like, see ya.
This is going to be so weird for Bill Gates, who's totally listening to this podcast.
Bill Gates, I work for a nonprofit that could benefit from your generous donations. I am the person in charge of the development department, which is the donations department. So hit me up. Signed, your daughter.
So what have you been consuming?
Oh, I've been watching this show called Perfect Harmony, and it is available on Hulu in the US, I believe. And it is about this grumpy old Yale music professor, or vocal professor, who like shows up in Kentucky because his wife has passed away, and he's after the funeral. And before he can commit suicide, he is in front of this church with a terrible choir and he's like, I can't do this. This cannot be the last thing I hear. And he goes in and kind of tells everyone to shut up and like, you're doing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. You're not an alto, like this whole other thing. And then he passes out. in front of them, and they like kind of adopt him, and he like helps them out.
Oh, that sounds so cute.
But,
So it's about music and kind of happy life thing?
I mean, it's all about him being grumpy and like the lives of all these people in the choir in Kentucky, and it's about like actually cultural expectations and cultural clashes.
Oh, see how very well fitting you picked that.
I mean, isn't life about cultural expectations though?
I mean, it's kind of like you can put that onto pretty much everything. So
Yeah. All right. So where can
yeah.
we find you online?
So I very much did not make same handles for same social media because why would I do that?
That doesn't make sense, yes.
I mean, you can definitely find me on mugglenet.com. My face is somewhere up there, definitely, and I've definitely written articles for this for that site. But on MuggleNet, I'm under my real name, which might be confusing because Aureo Potts is not my real name.
Well, sorry for introducing you as such.
No, it's all right. I run under Orion BC because usually it's because people can't pronounce my name, but my real name is Aurelia Lieb.
All right. So it's the R that's hard for me.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay. Well, I'm not used to like doing guttural sounds for R's because I'm Puerto Rican, so we
Yeah.
like roll them a lot. So like instead of saying carro like normal like Spanish speaking countries do, like right, we say cajo, like
Okay.
there's like a sound to it.
I mean, my name is Latin, and it's definitely more like an Italian name. So
Yeah, so like I've heard it as like Aurelia or
yeah,
Aurelia, but mostly Aurelia in like Latin countries.
yeah, exactly. That's how I know it. But like my experience, Americans, I tell them my name, they just look at me and give up. And
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just
no,
like,
yeah.
you can call me Oreo, like the cookies, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I can do that.
I say my name. So my full name is Adriana, and if I say
Yeah,
Adriana Wilson, like unless the person speaks Spanish, they won't be able to do that. So I usually say Adri Wilson
yeah,
or Adriana, and then they can pronounce it.
yeah.
What?
See, that happens when you kind of move countries and people just can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I used to like also my actual last name or my maiden name was
Yeah.
Caraballo Madera,
Oh.
right? So like we use two
Oh.
last names in Puerto Rico. So Caraballo Madera. And like even if I would say Adriana Caraballo, like no one could say that ever.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
Adriana Carballo, Caraballo.
Yeah. Oh man.
I mean, it's not an act of unfeminism to take my husband's last name. It's an act of ease and acclamation.
Yeah. I mean, I've legit had the situation where I tell her like, "Hey, my name's Aurelia," and she's like, "I can't say it." I was like, "Oh, no problem. You can call me Oreo. That's my nickname." She's like, "I can't say that either." I was like, "But like Oreo, like the cookies," and she's like, "Oh, I call you Cookie," and she called me Cookie for 6 months. I was like, "That was so not the point of the story."
Oh God, geez. Okay. Well, I don't like that. Yeah, people are rude. All right. So your handle at Aureo 009, which is AUREO 009, is that on Twitter?
That is on Instagram.
That's on Instagram. Okay, so that's your
Yeah.
Instagram handle. Where can we find you on Twitter?
It's at 05 and then also Oreo.
Oh, nice.
AUREO.
I am at Anana Banana on Instagram and Twitter because I somehow was able to get that on both platforms.
I mean, that is just the coolest handle ever, so I'm really jealous.
I mean, it's because when I was a baby, I couldn't pronounce my name like most Americans. So I would say that my name was Anana instead of Adriana. And then one of my best friends in college nicknamed me Anana Banana, and that sucked.
I mean, it's so cool. There's so many A's.
There are a lot of A's in my handle on my handles, yeah. And even though Julianna's not here and we missed her so much, but this episode might have been 3 hours if she was on. Her handle on Twitter is @Julianna_runs, and jelly like grape jelly. This is what she always says.
Okay. I just know runs because she always runs marathons. And
I
I'm just
know.
like, you're crazy.
Isn't she amazing? I am in constant awe of her dedication and ability to do this while I get just like winded from getting off the couch.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like getting out of bed, being like, oh, I need to lie down again.
Oh no, I'm tired again. All right, so I'm going to close with this question for listeners. How has Harry Potter affected your politics? You can let us know at 915-996-1699. And you can email us a voicemail at info@accupolitics.com also, or at Accupolitics on all the socials, because that was also available, which is pretty great. And you can support us on patreon.com/Accupolitics for as little as $2 a month. And I look forward to getting a voicemail from you or a voice memo on our email on how Harry Potter has affected your politics. Aurelia, did I do it? Did I do it?
Yeah, you did.
I always mispronounce everyone's name, so I feel this is a personal victory. I'm taking it, okay?
Yeah, I'm giving it out to you.
Well, it's been a wild ride. Thank you for joining us. But until next week, where we will be discussing politics of something in Chapter 4 on Order of the Phoenix, join us then. And until then, politics managed.